Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the fourth webinar in the Devolving Restitution series. I hope everyone had a lovely break and you're all excited for the afternoon session. My name is Megan Mills-Emerser, and I'm a research assistant at the Contested African Heritage Project here at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. I will be chairing this afternoon session, but just before we dive in, I'd quickly like to go over any housekeeping again. So as a brief reminder, today we are engaging in rich discussions on the theme of objects of sovereignty for this webinar. Both the chat and Q&A boxes are enabled and will be checked regularly. We want to encourage everyone to send in your questions, thoughts, and responses through the chat box. After the event, we will try and pull together and respond to the best of our ability. We are hoping to answer most questions through our blog site, which can be found on the University of Cambridge Museum's website. For live captions throughout the day, please visit Afford's Facebook page where this webinar is being live streamed, and the link will be put in the chat box below. For behaviour, we will take attendees out of the meeting if anything offensive, insulting, or meant to incite hatred is posted. Right, so moving on to this afternoon session, we have two exciting sessions planned. The first is focused on repositioning the Uganda Museum, and we'll have BT Abedo Nelson from the Ugandan National Museum in conversation with Mark Elliott from the MAA. Afterwards, we will have a student-led curatorial roundtable from students from the African and Caribbean Society here at the University of Cambridge and curators from the MAA, Powell Cotter Museum, Bristol Museum, and the Horniman. The webinar will end with the poet, Nick Makoa from Poet in the City, who will give a set of poetic minutes and therefore have the last word. So just before we begin the third session, I'd like to reintroduce Mark Elliott. Mark is a senior curator in anthropology here at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, where he has responsibility for collections from Africa, Asia, and Europe. His research background is primarily in South Asia, but he has curated and taught across ethnographic and archaeological collections. He's interested in the complex and little understood inner workings of museums and their history and their impact on collections care and interpretation in present. He is lead curator on the Stores Me project and Contested African Heritage project here at the MAA. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Megan, and hello again, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce this conversation between Abiti Adebo Nelson and myself, which was recorded yesterday afternoon, as Abiti was unfortunately unable to join us live today. Abiti Adebo Nelson is curator for ethnography and history at the Uganda National Museum. He's currently a PhD candidate of history at the University of Western Cape in South Africa. Abiti has co-curated exhibitions on Road to Reconciliation, the Milk exhibition project in Uganda and Switzerland, and the recent Unseen Archive of Idi Amin that opened at the Uganda Museum on the 18th of May 2019. Abiti's research focuses on community memorials, restitution of artifacts, ethnographic collections, and tribal society in Uganda. Now, this conversation is essentially a window on two curators from different institutions working out each other's positions on a forthcoming project that aims at delivering the permanent return of objects. We're talking about the logistics, the politics, the motivations, the needs and hopes that we, our institutions, and our stakeholders will be grappling with in the next 2 years. And I hope it's at least ethnographically interesting, but I also hope it addresses some of the issues that others have really eloquently and profoundly raised today. Abiti, I'm really grateful to you for taking part in today's webinar, and so thank you so much for joining us. I thought that the reason that we're here today is to introduce the project Repositioning the Uganda Museum, which is supported by a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and led by Professor Derek Peterson, a longtime friend of both of our museums in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The project, of course, aims to bring colleagues from your museum to our museum to select a number of artifacts for permanent return to Uganda, to be part of an exhibition, I understand, in Kampala. And I guess given the themes of today's webinar, I thought it would be very useful to actually have some conversation, some frank and honest conversation to our audience about a project that is actually aiming at delivering restitution and we could reflect on why and how we hope to do it. So so
Mark. I'm so quite grateful, and it's fortunately that I've had a prior experience of visiting Cambridge University Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology. That began in 2013. I had gone for British Museum training program, then followed that I was at University of East Anglia for my MA program, and definitely I spent also another time at the museum. So one critical thing which I looked at was as unique collections that the museum held, and I asked myself, if these objects, good ones, with rich indigenous knowledge, are being kept here, and one of you is there, but on the database, you are able to see more of them. What is it that this knowledge could bring to the younger generation? We know the elders, most of them died with that knowledge, but how can it be useful to reactivate new knowledge and new debate and the new thinking and engagement so that we rebuild the society? So all along, my thought has been that at one moment, at one time, these objects will come back home. But the home is definitely has to pass through the museum and then to reach to the communities. So one of my questions, practical point of view, these debates have been for long, since 1961. What has been the thoughts of the museum and the university about Uganda with those objects? Were they willing to return them, or they are just going to begin? And what are the practical steps that you will assure us that if we come to you, you'll be able to give some of the objects we want, that we want the communities to access?
Sure. Great questions, which I will do my best to answer. I think I can't speak for other generations or other colleagues at the university, but I think from my point of view, as you know, I'm one of two curators for anthropology, and I have the fortune and the obligation to be curator for Asian collections, African collections, and European collections. So I think my general level of ignorance about African collections has been amply demonstrated in the past. For me, I think it's fair to say that the Ugandan collections have not been visible at the museum. There are, as you may remember, I think there are two artifacts on display. Which is an extraordinary reflection, or poor reflection, of the richness of the collections that it's our privilege to have here. There are the ethnographic collections from Uganda at MAA number 1,475 individual objects, and they come from 74 individual sources, named sources, donors and collectors. Almost half of them, so 770 artifacts, were brought to MAA by Reverend John Roscoe, who was with the Church Missionary Society in Uganda up until 1909, I believe. And I think it's fair to say that to the extent that Uganda was known in the museum collections, it was very much equated with Roscoe. I think there was, I think the visibility of the Ugandan collections, and indeed the visibility of African collections generally in recent decades, has been pretty poor. I've found myself in a similar position with my previous work on South Asian collections, knowing that these collections have been effectively resting, and they haven't been engaged with for decades, and effectively there is, as I've spoken elsewhere, there is that feeling of being overwhelmed by the scale of the collections and by even our limited knowledge of the implications and the connections that those collections have, right? And the complexity of addressing them. And so I think for me, an opportunity like this is perhaps not as long anticipated as it has been for you, but for me, it is a huge opportunity for us to have conversations about these collections, to not only focus on objects that will return, but also what happens to objects that don't return now, in the short term and in the long term. And I think so. I feel it's a radical change for us that I'm very excited about. I think you mentioned the repatriation of the relics of Chibuka in that were made in
Chibuka, 1961.
Thank you. Yes, and I think from my from a little bit of digging in the archives, I think it's fair to say that the curator at the time, the director at the time, was somewhat reluctant that this process was happening, and it was very much top down from the university and pressure from the Ugandan government, the newly independent Ugandan government, to make this happen. I think if anything has changed over the 60 years since then, I think that has certainly changed. That the enthusiasm for change, the recognition of the need for change, and the hunger for something to happen is really felt within the museum now.
Yeah, so I think that is practical. I'm grateful that you managed to identify particular objects that are equivalent to 1,000 that belongs to Uganda, and they span for a long period of time, almost 100 years, which is also a centenary celebratory to Ugandans on this possibility. But the key question will be, if we have a chance to see some of the objects, and or maybe try to get some information, some images, how possible and how long will it take me if I'm to be there? How practical? I know sometimes we say we want to bring objects, and then there's a lot to be done.
Yes.
And is it possible for me just to go within a week and I'm able to say, this is the object, I know it can come, this is the one that can come, this is the one that can come? Is it possible, or it's just on theory that we will know that we have one day I will not have chance to see all these objects?
I think coming for a week would probably put a lot of pressure on you and us. I think I mean, certainly we've taken advantage of another project that's underway at the moment, the Stores Move project at MAA, which is moving 250,000 objects from our old external storage facility to a new newly refurbished space near the centre of Cambridge. And actually we finished work on unpacking, photographing, updating the documentation, and repacking and then transporting all of the Uganda collections in January. So I'm delighted to say that from my point of view, again, for the first time, I have an overview of those particular collections in my care. It also means that those images are accessible on our, the images in the full catalogue records are accessible on our online database. I would hope that a first step in any selection that you would make would be for us to be able to share, high resolution images and all of the documentation that we have, and to send that to you before you come, because as I'm sure you're all too aware, sifting through 1,400 objects, or indeed only 770 objects if we confine ourselves to Roscoe, would be a big ask within a week. So yes, I think to be able to take advantage of the the work that our team has done now. I would say 6 months ago, we'd have been really, really scared and anxious about whether this was even feasible. I think being able to have moved the collections already, so they are they're in one place. They're hopefully in the place that you will be coming to, and so they'll be physically accessible then. But I think obviously some sort of pre-selection would be necessary. I think it's fair to say that when you get here, if there's things that we haven't thought about before and that we want to take a look at, that's absolutely no problem. But obviously to sort of have a refined selection to begin with would be great. I'm not sure. Is it possible for you to say at this early stage what kind of things you might be interested in? Or
I at one moment I was trying to look at online database. At some point I was able to access, but certain point I can't access. I don't know which link will. Sometimes maybe I get confused on the right link.
Okay.
To get. Sometimes when I go through public web page, accessing the link becomes difficult. But definitely I'm not a decision maker.
Sure.
Of the museum. Definitely what we do is to get a session with fellow Ugandan, not only the museum staff and also some key stakeholders whom we work with. They have a look at it, and maybe they can easily identify this particular object is together with that, which might be separated when they are that side, or they were collected by different people. And if we can't get one object when the other one is left behind. So those are some of the technicalities that we might be able to encounter. So there's a real need for us to begin to have time to look through this. And of course, definitely we did not plan for the timing, but if the link is able and I get time with colleagues, we can easily look through and get to see this object was used for this. It has to be together with this, and it is in this place. You know, what we know, objects were not typified or separated. You will find a drum staying together with the pot or something, but when they reach to museums, pots are separated. Definitely, this is conservation aspect. You can't deny it. And so, but now when we think about returning, which objects to come and which ones to select, definitely the decisions is not going to be the curators. It needs to involve the custodians. Absolutely. I think that is key. The access of the images to which it allows us to share where those objects are coming from before we go, that will give us a better position to see which objects. Of course, now I'm raising this. Now, once through this Melon grant, we managed to get out of 1,000 or 100 or 200, what will happen to the next? Are we going to come back to bring the rest, or we will leave the rest there? So this is something which
sure.
I don't know what you will say. Maybe we will say the cost that the Melon Foundation can manage is this. That leads us to say, beyond Melon Grant project, what will be the future relationship between Ugandan Museum and Cambridge University? I think that's something which maybe you may not be able to speak by you will focus along this project, but this is one of the key projects issues that we will need to hear strongly from the museum management and the university. That means a future relationship, future imagination of the museum and the society to which we are kind of entrusted us. Not, it is not us making decisions, but it is the public who entrust us to work with them to see what they want to see.
Mm.
So I think that is what we want the university to understand in this project, and the real to make us the voice of the community to be heard at the university in this moment as we do the collection, and which means even when these collections come to the museum, we will want to amplify the voice, and the universities will be able to see and hear what voices continues to come from the community. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
that's.
I think I certainly hope, and I know it's the hope of the project, I think it's fair to say it's the hope of the museum as well, that this is not the end of something, this is the beginning of something. Hopefully, and that I think if the project is conceived in some senses as a pilot, albeit 60 years after the first pilot, I think that there is, I mean, for me, perhaps there's a potency to a physical return that can absolutely change the conversation, that can absolutely draw focus, and that in a sense we often see potential return in a lot of the conversations I have with stakeholders in other museums. We see potential return as something far in the future. It seems on one level the wrong way round to be talking about restitution at the outset of a project, but I think that's just our discomfort and our standard ways of looking at it. I think to begin with the question of return, and then actively be working towards what happens next, I think is hugely exciting for us, and it does require a commitment from the museum, from the university, to take this forward. I think I would be keen, as you are, to see this emerge from community members and stakeholders in Uganda as well. In terms of being able to being able to talk about what is important within what communities, what stakeholders want to see happen to the collection in the future. I think there are if the conclusion of the project was that more objects should be returned to Uganda, then I think that these are conversations that we're going to be having as European museum curators for decades to come. I think that this is where we are now. But I think it would be what I'm particularly excited about is the potential of this return to be the carrier for other kind of relationships and conversations, for the understanding of collections that temporarily or permanently remain in Cambridge to be enriched and improved and challenged by people back home, as it were, but also for me to share our understandings of how the collections have been dealt with and what has happened to them after, what has happened to them while they've been in the quote unquote care of the museum for 110 years.
Yes, I think that continues to for me on just one more question. Practicability on the objects when they leave the museum. We normally do what we call exhibition exchange and the export permit. And if I'm to go there and I'm coming with this object, how practical is that? Is it possible is this export permits being allowed, or it's something that will need a little bit of decisions?
That is going to be something that we need to work through as a project. In many ways, this is a pilot not just for potential returns to Uganda. This is a real exercise in how this is practically made possible in the future.
Okay.
I'd like to think of it as providing a roadmap, at least for MAA, but potentially for other institutions. I'm quite certain that there will be bureaucratic complexities to work through, but I think having the opportunity to test that, to try it, and to work these things out in one case will make it less of a what if in future, but rather so I think that's probably hedging my bets a little bit and dodging the question, but I think it's certainly, but it's really important for us to establish that, and to get a clear pathway.
Yeah, these are experiences we really need one to get through in regard to present travel situations and the need for these objects really for people. People talk, but if they keep talking and they are not seen, and then the pressure continues to come back to us, we will want to move to see practical, and even if it is small, it leads to another step. So I would love to see the project doing something practical, impactful, and meaningful, and respectful. That I think that is the key words which I would want to emphasize, and continue to see that we go beyond what we have and have to involve our communities. Is the key. I know when it comes back, also we have the bureaucracies of government, but really I will want to see that we start. So my first issue will be looking forward to see the access to the online images, and see that we will have another conversation possible with colleagues who will be able to see that they have seen this object, it is for this purpose, and they will want to see this, or this one can remain. So I think that one will be very good conversation for us. Why they choose the other one to remain, why they choose this one to come. So as I said, this is not going to be one man's decision. It needs we know some few objects are there, but we can't say which object is there without seeing it.
Of course.
Yeah, I think that's the key aspect for us.
And I think the fact that this is none of our decision, that that we work in museums. We don't have interpretative or any other ownership of these artifacts. That we can only work to facilitate these decisions being made, I think is critical and must be established by this kind of project. I think when you're able to come to Cambridge, I certainly see that as a midpoint in conversations. That because I have to say that many of us on the Stores Move project, where we're looking at the Ugandan objects literally coming out of boxes or coming off shelves, and of course in the back of our mind is always I wonder what our Ugandan friends and colleagues will be interested in. And there's probably an assumption from our point of view that it's going to be the well-documented objects, or the objects whose documentation shows particularly unequal context of acquisition or whatever, but I think I can equally see that this is that because we're not talking about a restitution claim, as it were. This is about putting a proposal together that the rights and wrongs of acquisition, and I'm going to say probably usually wrongs, don't necessarily come into it. It's about the it sounds like from what you're saying, it's the value of these objects to contemporary communities. regardless of how they were acquired.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but definitely one of the things which we would love to see is also access of information, because some of the objects moved with the one of the indigenous people who were taken, and also maybe there might be some objects that will require some process that will need the particular individual indigenous person descendants or those rather than the curators. So those are some practicalities, but I think what we need to look at is access to the images or information that will give us a better clue. And as we said, because the grant has limited time for me to stay in Cambridge, and we'll have little time. So continuing to see what is there, what information was there, who took it, who went, was it just the collectors and donors from Europe, or there were some people who were here who moved together with those objects, like during Roscoe's time. It was not all the objects were not taken by Roscoe. He moved with some of the agents who were here. So those are some of the things we would love to look at it, and it would be helpful if we can have access to some of the documentation. I know there are some few documentation might be around, but generally at the museum we have not got a hand to most of the information. I think that will be very helpful for us, and even the future of the museum. We know the time when they collected some of the objects, they left some of the objects here at the museum, and the information went away, but the objects remained behind. So we would love also to have some of the information that can help us to continue to provide interpretation for the contemporary people. I think that's why I was saying a little bit building that relationship will be helpful for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it excuse me, it sounds, I mean, this is clearly the practicalities that you've been describing, and the objectives for your museum and for our museum. I mean, this cannot be anything other than the marathon rather than the sprint. But
yes.
But what we are doing in this initial sprint phase is really establishing possibilities, really establishing what the questions are, really. That I think our exchange of questions throughout this process are going to be as fundamental as any exchange of answers. And the documentation, obviously, that with Roscoe in particular, there's a huge amount of published material on the collections, perhaps somewhat less unpublished material that we have access to, but I think certainly the questions of the agency and the identity of local collectors who supported Roscoe, who were paid by Roscoe to collect for him. We know that those people were there, and that they were, and what they were doing, but of course for us we don't know who they were. And I think if this project and if this series of conversations can provide more clues, more connections to better understand and to better complicate the agency of Roscoe himself, then I think that's massively important for both of our institutions and the communities we serve. So yes.
Yeah, I think that is very grateful for me. I look forward to see that the project will take off, and we will look for questions, and maybe there might be questions from colleagues along this project, and I would love to hear from them. I'm definitely part of the conversation and in the project, and we hope for the short period we will achieve some realistic results that will lead us to think more, and we will try to see what questions will come out, both from the practical museum practitioners, and also cultural practitioners, and also the people who have the contemporary young people who have begun to take interest on the knowledge in the museum in Uganda.
Yes.
I think that's very key to us. So yeah, I'd love to hear more in future, and then we'll see that in practical I will be able to see all of us get involved, and hopefully you will continue to be there. Sometimes we deal with you, and then next time we don't see you.
I hope I'm not going anywhere in the short term. But now that I've said this live on the internet, then maybe we can. Yeah, but no, okay. I think
yeah,
certainly. I think this is. I'm selfishly excited because I'm going to be learning an awful lot in the coming months and years, and I think it's going to be of huge value to us, and I think what you say there about we need to constantly keep in mind who we're doing this for, and whose needs need to be served by this, and to continually realize that of course it's not our needs, you know, the logistics are our side of the problem. But yes, I'm very excited, very much looking forward to welcoming you in Cambridge later this year, and for what sounds like it's going to be a very, very busy week. But hugely rewarding. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Abiti, and take care. Thank you. Bye.
That was so great. Thank you to both Mark and Abiti for your time and insightful comments. I think it is so important for us to be able to have these honest and frank conversations, especially about museum practice, including different perspectives, and especially about multi-generational route of restitution. I think that is something that we can all take forward. It'd be great to know the thoughts and opinions of the audience as well. So if you could put your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and I'm sure Mark would be excited to hear what you guys think.